So this lesson is about midpoints. So first we have to start by defining that word. It's pretty self-explanatory. A midpoint is just a point that divides a segment in half. So it'll split it into two congruent segments. In my diagram on the right, if M were the midpoint of segment AB, that would mean that AM and MB would be congruent segments. And remember that tick mark just means congruent. And then another word that goes along with midpoint is a segment bisector. A segment bisector is just any line that goes through a segment's midpoint. So it's going to cut the segment in half. So if I were to draw in a line that goes through point M, that line would be a segment bisector. So we can do some work with midpoints along line segments, similar to stuff we did in lesson 1.2. We can also do work with midpoints on a coordinate plane. So we have this big, crazy midpoint formula, and yeah, that box does look pretty scary, but basically what it's saying is in order to find the midpoint, we find the halfway point along each axis. So if I look along segment PQ, my x coordinate changes from right here to right here. X goes from this location, what we call x1, over to this location, x2. Same thing in the y direction as we go from P over to Q. Y changes from up here at y1 and it drops down to y2. So in order to find the midpoint, we're just going to travel half of that distance. We find that halfway point by finding the mean or the average of my coordinates. So the middle of x1 and x2 can be found by adding x1 and x2 together and then dividing by 2. Same thing, the middle of y1 and y2 can be found by adding y1 and y2 together and then dividing by 2. All right, let's try it out. So now we're going to take that diagram and just put some numbers to it. The endpoints of PQ are P at -3,6 and Q at 7, -2. Find the coordinates of the midpoint. Well, P gives me an X and a Y. We're going to call those X1 and Y1. Q also gives me an X and a Y. We'll call those X2 and Y2. Now I just have to plug that into my midpoint equation. And the midpoint, and again, this looks kind of scary, but it's not too bad, is found by doing x1 plus x2 divided by 2 to get the x coordinate, and then doing y1 plus y2 divided by 2 to get the y coordinate. So in this case, my x's are -3 and 7. Let's go ahead and plug those in. My y's are 6 and -2. And now I just have to take this and simplify it. So -3 plus 7 would be 4. 4 divided by 2 would be 2. And 6 plus -2 would also be 4. 4 divided by 2 would be 2. So the midpoint of that segment would be 2, 2. I'm also going to show you another way to do the midpoint without using the formula. They're both going to give you the same answer. It's just Some people prefer this way that I'm going to do it on the right. So in order to find the midpoint, I'm going to write out my two endpoints as if they were endpoints on a segment. So down here at one end, I've got the point -3, 6. And over here at the other end, I've got the point 7, -2. I want to find the midpoint, so the point exactly in the middle. If you look back to our diagram, remember the midpoint is just halfway between the x's and halfway between the y's. So we're going to find that halfway point. In terms of my x's, my x changes by going from -3 up to a +7. -3 up to +7 is changing by adding 10. So if I wanted to just go halfway to get to the midpoint, instead of adding 10, I would add 5. -3 plus 5 is +2. We can do the same thing for y's. My y value changes by going from +6 down to -2. That is a change of subtracting 8. So if I wanted to go halfway, I would subtract half of 8, which is 4. 6 minus 4 would be 2. So either way, I'm going to get the point 2, 2. It's just two different ways to think about the same problem. All right, here's another skill with midpoints. This time we're given the midpoint, we're given an endpoint, and I want to find the coordinate of the other endpoint. And again, I'll show this to you both ways. So the midpoint is 5, 3. One endpoint is 2, -3. So again, that gives me a x1 and a y1. I want to find my other endpoint, so I want to find x2, y2. So with my midpoint formula, we usually start off by writing down the equation. So we want x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2 to equal our midpoint. Well, in this case, our midpoint is the point 5, 3. We know x1 and y1, so I'm going to go ahead and plug those numbers in. X1 is 2, y1 is -3. We just want to find a value for x2 and for y2 that is going to make this equation I wrote true. Well, in order for that to happen, my x coordinate, 2 plus x2 over 2, should equal 5. We can do some guess and check to make that happen, or we could solve an equation. I usually like to solve an equation. So I'm going to say 2 plus x2 over 2 equals 5. Multiply each side by 2. 2 plus x2 equals 10. Subtract 2 on each side. x2 equals 8. So I've got my x coordinate. And then we also know that this portion negative 3 plus y2 over 2 should equal 3. Again, you can guess and check or you can solve an equation. So let's say negative 3 plus y2 over 2 has to equal 3. Multiply by 2 on each side. Negative 3 plus y2 should equal 6. Add 3 to each side. Y2 should equal 9. Now that I have an x value and a y value, I should have the coordinate of that endpoint. Just gotta put it together. The coordinate of the other endpoint is 8, 9. So that's the midpoint formula. Now I'll show it to you with the shortcut method that I think is a little bit easier for these types of problems. So again, we're going to imagine we have a segment with 2 endpoints and a midpoint. I know one of my endpoints, that's 2, negative 3. I know my midpoint, which is 5, 3. I want to find my other endpoint. Remember, the midpoint is the halfway value for x's and the halfway value for y's. So to go from 2 to 5, I would add 3. If adding 3 gets me halfway, to go the whole way, I would add 6. And 2 plus 6 is 8. My y's go from negative 3 to positive 3. Negative 3 to positive 3 is a change of adding 6. If adding 6 gets me halfway, to go the whole way, I would add 12. And negative 3 plus 12 is 9. So my other endpoint is 8, 9. I got one more example that's similar to that last one. So the midpoint of segment AB is 3, 9. One endpoint is at negative 4.5, 2. Find the coordinate of the other endpoint. And again, we'll do this both ways. So my midpoint is 3, 9. This A coordinate tells me x1 and y1, and x2 and y2 is what we're trying to find. So let's start off with our midpoint formula. I know x1 plus x2 over 2, and y1 plus y2 over 2 should be the midpoint. In this case, the midpoint is 3, 9. Let's plug in some of the stuff we know. I know x1 and y1. X1 is negative 4.5. Y1 is 2. So this big fraction, negative 4.5 plus x2 over 2, should equal 3. You can guess and check to get there if you want. Otherwise, I usually just like to do some algebra. So if negative 4.5 plus x2 over 2 equals 3, I would multiply by 2 on each side. Then I would add 4.5 on each side. So that gets me to x2 equals 10.5. And then in terms of our y coordinate, we know that 2 plus x2 over 2 should equal 9. Two plus y2, I think I said x2 earlier. Multiply by 2 on each side. Subtract 2 on each side. I've got an x value and a y value, so the coordinate of my other endpoint would be 10.5, 16. All right, let's do it with the shortcut. Again, both ways work. It's just some people prefer one over the other. So down at one end, I know I've got an endpoint. That is negative 4.5, 2. Somewhere in the middle, I've got a midpoint. That is 3, 9. At the other end, I've got an endpoint, and right now those coordinates are a mystery. Remember, the midpoint is the halfway value for the x's and the halfway value for the y's. So to go from negative 4.5 up to a positive 3, and sometimes when you get decimals in here, that's a little tricky. That is a change of adding 7.5. No, it's a change of adding 6.5. No, it's 7. Oh, I'm confusing myself. So 4.5 to get up to 0 would be 0.5 would get me to, yeah, I'm right, 7.5. All right. So then to go the whole way, I would add double that. 7.5 times 2 would be 15. And then negative 4.5 plus 15 is positive 10.5. And see, this was kind of confusing. So typically when there's decimals, I like to use the formula. And then for my y's, y goes from 2 to positive 9. 2 to positive 9 is a change of adding 7. If 7 gets me halfway, to go the whole way, I would add 14. 2 plus 14 is positive 16. So again, for midpoints, we've kind of got two different methods. It's really your choice, whichever one you prefer.